For me, unfortunately, it was basically like almost worst case scenario because my husband tried to take his life. He actually had two suicide attempts before he got sober. But the first time was kind of when I was like, okay, I can't deal with this on my own. I had shut a lot of people out of my life because I didn't want them to know what was happening. There was a lot of shame around it. I didn't want them to think bad of him because he was a good person. He just, was dealing with a really hard thing. And
Hello, Sober on Purpose family. I am so excited to introduce you, Julie Sanford. She is a recovery mentor. She is also a podcaster, so you really want to go pick this up at Married to Addiction. And she does a ministry that teaches wives of alcoholics how to stop drowning in their husband's addiction, how to learn to find themselves again, and how to manage through this difficult season and come out thriving on the other side. Welcome, Julie.
thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today and having me on.
It's going to be fabulous because we were already talking about that. You and I are a wealth of knowledge of what not to do during this very difficult season. And part of the thing that I know that I did was I made the relationship really unsafe because I was so angry. If anybody else is there, we'd love to hear your comments. We'd love to hear what you're talking about. But Julie, give us a little bit more about how you decided God was calling you into this ministry.
So my story is similar. I had a lot of anger. My husband is now 7 years sober, but prior to that, had many, many years that he was deep in addiction. And it was a long, hard path, like you said, a lot of times of what not to do because I was reacting instead of acting. And the household was just absolute turmoil all the time. I mean, my life felt like it was in a shambles. His life, my kids were kind of dealing with the fallout. And so looking back and seeing all the things now, that is like, oh, okay, well, that would have probably been a better approach. Or I wish I had taken better care of myself and not let myself totally fall apart. And all of those things were kind of what led me to starting Married to Addiction, because I didn't feel like I could find anybody back then to help me with that stuff. I just had to figure it out the hard way.
Yeah.
And so I thought, if I can even reach a few women who are sitting on the floor of their closet crying, not knowing what to do, like I was, and basically tell them, hey, I did this, but I don't recommend it. I recommend this. Then, I'll feel like it's been a success. And that was 3.5 years ago. And we're still going strong. So I feel blessed to be able to have taken something so hard and have God bless it in a way that now I can help him help others, essentially.
And I'm so grateful you are. The only reason I'm laughing is in the house we were living in at the time, there was a space between the washer and the dryer. And I got in between the space and was weeping in the middle of that space because I'm like, I just needed something that kind of contained this intense grief. That's where we could talk about shame, we could talk about grief, we could talk about safety, but I think part of the first part of it is when you really admit to yourself what is actually happening.
Yeah.
How did that come about for you when you really had to say, I can't ignore this anymore?
For me, unfortunately, it was basically like almost worst case scenario because my husband tried to take his life. He actually had two suicide attempts before he got sober. But the first time was kind of when I was like, okay, I can't deal with this on my own. I had shut a lot of people out of my life because I didn't want them to know what was happening. There was a lot of shame around it. I didn't want them to think bad of him because he was a good person. He just, was dealing with a really hard thing. And I thought I could manage it and handle it. And, it's fine. I can figure this out. And so I had pushed everyone away. And then when that happened, he actually was missing for almost 48 hours. And that was very unlike him. He wasn't a bar drinker. He wasn't like a leave the house drinker. So I knew that something was wrong. And of course the police were involved and we didn't know where he was. And so then I'm, panic calling my brother in California and my parents in South Carolina and, all of my husband's family. And like, okay, we're in a really bad spot. And at that point was like, okay, this is definitely where things have shifted. And I know now that this is not something that I can deal with by myself in any way, shape, or form. So that was kind of like the point where things turned for us.
I want to take this up a level because now you've had time to process it. When you're looking back, where do you see God's hand? Where do you see the enemy? What do you see playing out in the spiritual realm as you're dealing with this in the natural?
It is such spiritual warfare. And I didn't realize at the time because I thought that I was helping and I was so focused on my husband that I didn't realize what was happening to me. And I was so focused on my husband that I mean, I knew that my kids were seeing and hearing stuff that weren't great, but I was still so like worried about him, like mostly, that I didn't realize that the enemy was all over the house, taking down all of us, not just taking down my husband. And looking back and seeing that God's grace now has taken that into a whole different path where now I can go back and teach people, like I was saying, all the things not to do in front of your kids, not to do as a wife, not to try to take on yourself. Of course, I can see that all led us here, which is a beautiful story. But a lot of people, it doesn't go that way for a really long time to where there's a shift in that way, and you stay stuck in that mire for so long of just the enemy just having his way with everyone in the house. And it didn't feel like that when I was in it. I didn't really recognize it so much as spiritual warfare. But now I'm like, man, yes, that was 1,000% what we were dealing with. I did think sometimes that when my husband was really inebriated, he would change significantly, obviously. But he's a real, like, mild mannered guy. Like, if you ask people to describe him, he's just real, mellow and gentle and whatever. And he was not that when he was really drunk. And I remember sometimes looking at him and being a little fearful because it did kind of feel evil. And I remember thinking that I just got chills when I said that. I remember thinking that and being like, well, I mean, it's just because he's really drunk or whatever. But I do feel like that is something that we are battling in the home when there's addiction and we don't realize it at the time.
Well, and at least I wanted to think, well, he's still going to work. He's still functioning. He shows up at most of the kids' games. He turns up for a meal. I wanted to think this is not that big of a deal, or as we said earlier, I can handle it. What for those that are in that spot right now? What exactly were you feeling that you went, no, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. Don't talk to me about that.
Yeah, I remember thinking of other people's husbands. Well, so and so's husband drinks about the same amount. And I think so. And I remember Googling it too, like how much is normal, how much is not normal. And really, if I had just kind of looked around at what was happening in our life, like clearly it was affecting our life. But I was trying to tell myself for so long, well, it's not that bad. I can deal with it. I can manage it. And so I think that we stay stuck there for a long time where we are thinking, well, maybe it's not that bad. Like, is it really that big of a deal that, he called in again this week? Like, do other people do that? And I think that it really just, when you start noticing how it's affecting your life on a daily basis and affecting the other people in your house, especially, like that kind of was where I was like, okay. So my son actually came to me one day. He was maybe 4 or 5, and he had written, like, scrawled a little something about, like not fighting or not yelling or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that was kind of like a real eye opener. It's like, okay, well, he is really little and he's picking up on more than I thought he was, and it's affecting him more than I thought it was, which now seems dumb. Looking back, it's like, well, of course it was. Y'all were screaming at each other. But in the moment, I kind of still felt like I was doing an okay job of protecting him, or that he didn't really know because he was just really little. He didn't get it type thing. But yeah, that was a real eye opener for sure.
Well, and that's I speak with a lot of women, and sometimes I feel like the outcast. I'm pretty volatile, and I'm pretty angry. And what I figured out was that was a trauma response, which wasn't my husband's doing. I have some trauma in my background. But when those uncertainty, unsafe things started showing up, I reverted to that 3-year-old, 6-year-old, 9-year-old trauma response. So if you were to walk into my house, you would have seen me. I would be the one you wouldn't want to take to the shrink. I would be the one you'd want to cart off to jail. I am the one who's acting out all over the place. And what I didn't realize was my craziness was setting off everybody else's craziness. And I was also being triggered, and I didn't know how to handle my triggers.
Yes,
So
100%. And I was that way too. Yeah, I did that too. I mean, a lot of the screaming and yelling and stuff, I started that. I started that. You know, he was drunk as a skunk or whatever. But the kids, I think, may or may not have noticed that as much as they would have noticed me coming in from work and like lighting into him right when I walked in the living room and saw that he was drunk. You know what I mean? So I did that. So I need to take responsibility for that as well. But in the moment, I was like, well, I'm not the problem. Like, clearly, this is the problem. If he wasn't drunk, then I don't have to yell, you know, those types of things. And it makes such sense when you're in the moment because it's this desperate situation. And like you said, you're also reacting in a way that you've kind of been taught to from other things you've been through in your life. And you're in a panic mode basically all the time. And so it just kind of comes out like you're walking around, you know, full to here with frustration and overwhelm and freaking out all the time. And it doesn't take much, you know, it doesn't take much to just set you off. So it is really hard to recognize that is, like you said, even tied to stuff from before that, you know, that's just making you be in that reactive mode all the time.
When you're thinking back to that and not reaching out, so it took me close to 10 years to reach out for help. When you're thinking back to that and not reaching out for help, and you're living in this panic state, anger state all this time, what was the holdup to reaching out, to saying, hey, I can't do this?
I feel like, and for me, it wasn't that long, but it was a few years. It was really bad to where my husband wasn't even really working or anything for almost 2 years. And I just kept thinking, I just haven't figured it out yet. You know, I just haven't done the right thing yet, or I just haven't said the right thing yet, or I just haven't, you know, figured out whatever it is that's going to make a difference for him, not realizing that that was not my responsibility to fix it or figure it out in the first place. But I just thought that it was coming. I was going to figure it out. And then it just never did, you know? And then I just got to the point where it was just, like I was saying, it was a desperate situation. And at that point, I knew, you know, I basically can't deal with this. I still, though, even after that first time, I still tried to pick that ball back up and run with it. And at that point, I felt even more desperation because now, you know, I was like, wow, like his life is literally on the line. Yeah. So I felt even more like I needed to figure out, even more like I had to fix it. You know, now, wow, this is like a life and death thing.
Whose voice is that? I'll get it figured out. I'll handle it. Whose voice is that?
It's not God's voice because He didn't want me to figure it out. I know that now, but He was like, let me know when you're done and I'll go to work. But, you know, you're still in the way. So, and I always, with the women I work with now, one of the things that I tell them a lot is as long as you are the loudest voice in your husband's ear, it's going to be real hard for him to hear God. But
say that one more time. Say that really needs to be said.
Yeah, as long as you are the loudest voice in your husband's ear, it's going to be real hard for him to hear God.
You mean I can't tell him what Jesus is saying to me and what he needs to be doing?
Yeah, been there, done that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But yeah, you know, that's not how God would talk to him either. God's not going to scream and yell at him. God's going to use a still small voice. And I don't think I ever, until things started shifting and I realized that we needed to be on the same team, I never used a still or small voice with my husband.
Shoot, Julie, you were calling me out in all directions.
Because I'm talking about myself.
At the back door and say, Jesus is coming for you. I literally. Literally,
I
Jesus.
hear you.
And I'm yelling it, not like I'm saying it here. I didn't own a still small voice for him
Yeah,
anyway.
me
Not
neither.
for my kids, but I didn't
Yeah,
own one of those.
same.
What? Where? I don't even know how to frame this. What do you think had kept us in this panic to where we're digging our own grave?
I think that goes back to the spiritual warfare, because addiction is such an easy way for the enemy to take down a bunch of people at once. And and then you think about even like it's a generational thing too. Like children in a household where there's been addiction that has resulted in the dissolution of a marriage, now are children of alcoholics that come from a broken home. So, and then that affects them, and then that affects, future generations and whatever. And what a great setup for the enemy. I mean,
Oh man, he's running touchdowns all over the place.
yeah, that's a field
Carrying the
day,
ball.
Yep. And I don't think people really recognize a lot of times that is what is at the root of a lot of it. And he gets in our head just as much as he's in our husband's head, or just as much as he's in, whoever it is that's battling addiction. Like he can take us down too, like fully pull us under with being, because we're so wrapped up in the addiction that it's almost like we're addicted ourselves. I always call it being addicted to the addiction. I was totally addicted to the addiction.
Absolutely.
Fully.
Two of the biggest lies that were ever spoken over me were from my own dad, that I was a liar and a sex addict. And that is unfortunately exactly what I became. But join me on October 23rd for the Blessed Family Recovery Summit to learn more about my journey away from that identity and into my God-given identity.
So when you work with women, how do you I think of it like sticky, like a Velcro. I'm the addiction's happening over here, right? And then I'm stuck to him trying to figure out the addiction for him, right? For him.
For
I
him.
don't think he has a brain in his head at this point. We were discussing beforehand the ugly things that I thought about my husband. I'm trying to figure it out for him, but I'm so stuck to him, I can't see it. So how do you help women? I don't, Al-Anon uses the detach with love, and that's not inappropriate. I think people forget the love part. I think they just detach.
Oh, yeah. I call it untying because I think that untying for me is a better visual, like mental visual of untying yourself from the addiction. Like you're not untying from the person, you're not detaching from that person, but you're untying this, that you've just felt like is just wrapped around you. And I think that a lot of times they come in and they want to be told how to fix it, which is what I wanted. I wanted somebody to tell me how to fix it, and I can't do that. So the first thing that I try to do is get them to a point where they start to loosen those laces. And I tell them that is because, and this is part of it for sure, like we were saying before, you need to make some space between you and your husband, because that's the space that God can fill. And if you're here all the time, then there's no space for God to, move in and work and move in the way that he wants to. So we kind of start with that, like gently starting to let go of the reins. And then they start to realize how much lighter that feels and how much easier it feels for them, which I think sometimes we don't realize that we're doing that for us too. So then when you start experiencing space for you too, because now there's a space in the middle where God can come in and work on his side of things, but you now have space to think about, okay, well, now what do I need? What have I been neglecting for myself? Then we kind of start moving over into that territory of, okay, now let's fill you back up. How have you been falling apart? And a lot of times they don't even realize that they've been doing that until they get that space, because it's always just been about him. And then when they're like letting that go a little bit, it's like, okay, so this is weird. Now what? You know?
What
So then we start working on the rest of it.
Yeah. So I got this image. So if the enemy is whispering in my ear, you've got to go save him, you've got to go fix this, and then I'm over here yelling in his ear, guess who's in this conglomerate together? We're all kind of stuck together. And like you've been saying multiple times, and I hope the audience is hearing it, when you do that, when you do this, stuck to the husband, enemy is stuck to you, running rampant in the household, guess who's not in the house?
Yep.
Guess who has politely said, okay, when you're ready to hear me, I'm going to be there. I haven't abandoned you. I'm going to be there, but we can't hear God's word at that point.
Right.
What did you do to be able to hear God again? Because I know you guys were going to church. You're in a believing household. All those. It wasn't that you had said bye bye God. It was just the deception was so heavy.
Mm-hmm. And even to the point where I remember having doubts about my faith because I did not understand that, you know, I grew up in the church and I accepted Christ when I was like 8 years old. And I, you know, was raised to believe the things that I believed. And I was praying like I was always told to pray for days and weeks and months and years, and nothing was changing. And I didn't understand like why. If you're real and you know that I need help as your daughter and my family is falling apart, why aren't you doing anything? And so I did have times where I was like, is God even real? Like, has this whole thing just been like a sham? And I've just, you know, not realized that I've just bought into something that's not real. Like I had those doubts for the first time in my life. And I remember having a moment in the shower where I was just like so at the end of myself because I just didn't know what else to do. And I just like screaming out, like literally screaming out, like, help us. And it was shortly after that where my husband agreed to go to treatment, not immediately, but not that long after that. And I think that because my faith had been tested, it was kind of just like, okay, well, I'm going to see if you show up now. I'm going to see if you show up now that I really am trying to just release it. And because I don't know what to do anymore. And I think that was a kind of a turning point where I went back to being more open to trying to listen for the first time in a long time because I had asked for that help and also tried to release it at the same time. I think that was a big part of it. And I just wasn't ready to do that until that moment. But that's what I try to teach other women. Don't take that long. Please don't take that long to get to that point.
We can help you. What I know what it felt like for me to get to the end of myself. What did it feel like for you? How did you know you were at the end of yourself? You couldn't pick this up one more day.
I was exhausted in every way. Like I think I told you before, I was covered in hives that I didn't realize at the time were stress-induced hives, but I was like I was a property manager at the time and I was trying to run a property and, you know, work like 40 plus hours a week, covered in hives, like 75% of the day. It was awful. And I just felt like my job was falling apart, my health was falling apart, my mental health was just gone. Like I said, I was depleted spiritually. I just was exhausted. And it was less like, okay, God, you're right, I need to turn this over. And more just like, I have nothing left. Nothing. Like I'm going to need to be checked into one hospital or the other. Soon. Soon. Because I had nothing left, just nothing. And it was because I had waited so long to get help, you know, to get support, to get any of that.
Absolutely. Well, and that's what I see too is it was kind of like hanging on a cliff by the edge of your nails. I had to release because there wasn't anything left to hang on with.
Yep.
And
100%.
My story is similar to yours. We had a major crisis, not a health crisis, but a major crisis in there. And I had to release. There wasn't any job for me anymore. There wasn't anything I could do. It had been taken so far out of my hands, I couldn't do it anymore. For the woman, and bless her heart if she can get there before she hits this point, for the woman who's like, yeah, I hear you. I feel like I'm stuck to him. I feel like the enemy's in my ear. I feel like I'm trying to turn a ship, a huge cruise ship around, and I'm trying to do it with a spaghetti noodle. You know, what would you say to her right now? She could implement today. Implement's a big word. She could shift today that would slow this down.
I think the biggest thing that would have made an impact for me now, whether or not I would have taken action on that immediately, I don't know. But I think if somebody would have just said, this is not your job. This is not for you. This burden is not yours. Like, you don't have to do this. Because I felt like I had to do it. Like, I was the only one who was going to fix it. I was the only one who was close enough to make a difference or to get him to, recovery or to do whatever. I felt like it was on me. I had to fix it for myself. I had to fix it for my husband. I had to fix it for my kids. And if somebody had just come in and been like, this is not your responsibility, and really explained that to me and why it wasn't my responsibility, because it's God's, of course, and just given me permission to let go of that. Again, I don't know that I would have acted on it, but I sure would have thought about that. And I probably would have felt a great deal of relief to just know that I wasn't the one who had to do that anymore. So I think that that's something that would have made a difference for me.
What kind? I'm gonna push you a little bit here. What kind of language would they have needed to say to you? I was so angry and so out of my head by that time. What kind of language would they have needed to say to you to get you to unlock the grip?
Back then, I think if somebody would have just told me, you can't help him, I don't know that I would have believed that right then. But I did definitely, that would have, again, been food for thought, because I was finding that out the hard way.
Yeah.
I was finding that out. And if somebody had really said, you can't help him, like, look back at A, B, C, D through Z that you've done. What has made a difference?
Yeah. Yeah. And you had worked really hard. I mean, it had been another full-time job. And for you listening, we hear you, we see you, we know the yes buts, but the family will fall apart. Or I had a lot of financial infidelity, or I won't be able to survive, or maybe you're in a second marriage. I don't want to fail again. We hear you.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you keep pushing, you're pushing God away.
Mm-hmm.
Which leaves you at a point of nothing. I don't know about you, Julie, but what it came down to me was, I don't want to be out of God's will, and God is saying to let go.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And because he wants you to let go for your husband, but he also wants you to let go for you, because now you are also sinking. And you can't be any good to anybody when you're in that place.
Absolutely. So let's bring this back up again. There is hope.
Yes. Yes.
There is so much hope, because we serve a living, loving God who says, I am there.
Yes.
My sweet daughters, I am there. I need you to let me handle it. So how did you begin to let him handle it? I know you were forced, your hand was forced, but when did you start to feel that God was bringing you as a team, bringing you back together?
The biggest shift for me was actually, and again, something that I wish I would have done sooner, but the biggest shift for me was when my husband went to treatment and they had a family week. And I went there every day. It was about 4 hours away. So I went to the town where his treatment center was, and I stayed there overnight each day. And it was a full week. And every day I would go, and they would teach us as family a lot of things that they've been talking to them about. It was the first time that I heard about a lot of those things. It was the first time I learned about addiction, like really learned about addiction. Mm-hmm. Not what I thought it was, but really learned about addiction. And it was such a huge eye opener for me that I remember just looking at my husband and being like, I'm sorry. Yeah. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't know that it was all this. I didn't know, like, that you were going through all of that. Like, it was that deep and that wide and that whatever. So that was huge for me. And I think that God used that to show me, to kind of like knock me over the head and be like, he is struggling. Like, you are fighting him and he's already struggling. He's already fighting internally. Like, y'all need to come together on this. And I remember my husband saying that was a big turning point for him too. Like, when instead of it being me versus him, it was us versus addiction. And, united trying to figure this thing out. It changed everything. And I think that's kind of where God really started to shift things, because I was out of the way. I got it, I was starting to get it at least. My husband now felt like he had some space and some understanding, which for him was huge. And that's really where I think God was like, okay, now we start to build.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Just for those of us who are a little more volatile than some, what happened to your anger when you began to get understanding?
It was a huge relief to not feel that anymore, because I carried around the anger 24/7. And, I had heart palpitations. It was affecting me in every way. Like, I had a hairpin trigger at work, everywhere. Don't cut me off in traffic either, because it's not going to be pretty. Like, I had been carrying that for so long and not realizing. Like, I remember my shoulders I felt like they were constantly on fire, because I had so much tension in my body from that anger, and that always just like being, ready for the next shoe to drop. That being able to release that was just such a huge relief. It was like, man, I just felt, like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders at that point, literally.
That's awesome. You have something very special going on this month. Tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about that, what women are going to find there. I'm assuming it's only for women. Am I in the right place?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pro-life.
Sorry, gentlemen. We can get you some resources, because we do know that there are women who are struggling with substance use disorder. There are women who are struggling with pornography. It's not a single gender issue. But right now, Julie is getting ready to launch something very special here in the middle of October.
Yes. So I'm running the second live round of an event that I put on twice a year, called How to Get Off of the Addiction Roller Coaster. And it's 4 days between the 14th and the 17th. And basically each day you get a coaching video along with like a worksheet or some, exercise to work through to help you practically apply what you've learned to your life. There is a private group component with that too. So during when the event's going on, you can hop in there with other wives and actually talk to people who know exactly what you're going through and are dealing with some of the same things. During the live event, I also give away some prizes of some of my other products and programs and stuff. So it's something that I do throughout the year too, where you can have access to it just kind of like as a self-led thing. But the events, when they do happen twice a year, it's just a lot more, I guess, camaraderie with that, because like I said, you're doing it alongside other women at the same time. So that will be coming up in just a couple of weeks. So again, it starts on the 14th of October through the 17th. And you can find out more on my website, marriedtoaddiction.com. And then roller coaster event. You can sign up right there, and it's all totally free.
Awesome. Now, how Julie and I got together was I am running a summit, the Blessed Family Recovery Summit, Where is God in the Chaos of Addiction? Mm-hmm. So you can hit hers. This is a great month. You can hit hers. And then the one that we're running that she is part of, and you can hear more of her story, is happening the 24th, 25th, and 26th of October. So we'd love to have you in all of those. That summit is dual gender. We want all of you to show up, and you're going to hear from people who have been on our side, where we're not necessarily in active addiction like the world calls it, but at least I would say I'm addicted to the addict themselves. Yes. As Julia said earlier, I'm love and relationship addiction. So there's a component for me too. And folks who have struggled with it. I think, Julie, in my very early days, I would take all the AA tapes and listen to their struggles, because I didn't quite get it. But when I was listening to people who were not living in my household, causing me issues, I thought, I was beginning to get it. So those stories, I think, are super valuable, and that's going to be in the summit, again, totally free. So this is like, Sober October. Come on in, and we're talking about, people get confused. God asks us to be intentionally sober. And if you haven't found it in First Peter, he asks us to be sober-minded, which means emotionally sober. And I think, Julie, one of the things that I came to was I began to be thankful for the addiction in my household.
Mm-hmm.
Thankful because I would have continued to treat people poorly because I didn't understand about my own triggers. I didn't understand about my own trauma. I didn't understand how I behaved. It took a stone sharpening stone or iron sharpening iron for me to get there, for me to say, oh, God, you're not just looking at him, you're looking at me, and you're looking at the things that I'm doing. Now, wasn't pleasant. I wish it could have been done some other way. I don't wish it on anybody, but we're both here to tell you there's a way out.
Yes.
Because he hasn't given us anything that he has not given us the way out, and it's through him rather than through our own strength. So, Julie, tell us again where we can find you and what you've got going, because you have a podcast all of your own.
I do. It's called Married to Addiction. That's pretty much my common theme across all platforms. So you can find me under that name on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram. And yeah, that's the name of my podcast as well. And then again, my website is marriedtoaddiction.com. And the event is at marriedtoaddiction.com rollercoaster-event.
Fabulous. And then you can hop on over to the Blessed Family Recovery Summit. You can get a lot of stuff for free. We are hoping that you will, well, we know if you're open to it, God will speak into your heart, into your mind, and into your soul. It's a matter of showing up. And that's what I did later. Then I hit a lot. And one of the reasons I believe that Julie, you and I are here is because God doesn't want us to keep abandoning ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you so much for being here, Julie.
Thank you again for having me. It's been fun talking to you.
You, beloved listener, are creative, resourceful, and whole. Do you want to add more purpose to your sober journey? Do you want to make room for the new and make your dreams a reality? Apply today for a dream session. Go to tanyajoya.com. That's TANYAGIOIA.com and apply today. Let's get you dreaming about your new purpose.